Verity Sloane was the girl every man in Cedar Hollow looked past. Even the auctioneer forgot to count her at the church social. She stood at the edge of the lamplight with a torn hymn in her lap, and while the pretty girls were bid on for pie and a walk home, no one thought to call her name. She did not weep about it. She threaded her needle by the light of the door and kept mending, and she did not let her hands shake. That was the thing about Verity. Her hands never shook. Then, Amos Reeder needed a wife. Or he needed to lose everything. His father had signed a paper in a bad winter. Now the Meridian Land Loan held a note for $470 against the only creek water quarter for miles. The land office would grant the title in spring, but only to a settled household. A man alone in a dirt house was not a household. Amos had 81 days to marry, or the water quarter was gone. 2 prettier girls had already said no to the dirt house. So Amos walked up to Verity at the town well and proposed the way a man buys a mule. Flat voice. Eyes on the bucket. His name. Her keep. The claim saved. Nothing more. And Cyrus Boyd, the land agent, stood by his fine horse and watched, and he said it loud enough for 40 churchgoers to hear. Marry the mouse then. It won't save you 81 days from now. 40 people heard Amos Reeder choose the plainest girl in town. But here is what none of them knew. Not Boyd, not the town, not even Amos. Verity Sloane once kept the land office ledgers with her own hand. She copied every filing that crossed that desk, and she remembered, clear as her own name, what Cyrus Boyd wrote down the winter Amos's father died. If you believe love is built with 2 pairs of hands, this story is for you. Before we go on, subscribe and tell me in the comments the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, back to Cedar Hollow. It was spring of 1874, and Nebraska Territory was mostly wind and grass. Cedar Hollow was a church, a store, a land office, and 40 families holding on with their fingernails. Amos Reeder's father had come out 3 years before Amos did. The old man had walked the whole quarter section on foot and picked the one piece of ground with live water running through it, a creek that did not dry in August like the others. Every other claim for 6 miles had to haul water or pray for rain. Not the Reeder quarter. That creek was worth more than the house, more than the plow, more than anything a man could carry. The old man filed the claim. He built the soddy with his own 2 hands, cut from the prairie in bricks of root and dirt. And then, in January, before he could prove up and win the title, he died in his bed with the frost thick on the one greased paper window. Amos buried him behind the soddy and came into a claim he could not legally hold. The law was plain, and the law was cruel. A homestead claim had to be established as a settled household before the land office would grant title. A widower's son living alone in a burrow did not count. And there was the note. $470 his father had borrowed from Meridian in the lean months, secured against the claim itself. If Amos came to the spring filing unmarried, unsettled, and short of that money, Meridian foreclosed and took the whole quarter, creek and all, for the price of a signature. Cyrus Boyd made sure Amos understood it. He rode out to the soddy one gray afternoon in his good coat and told it to him straight across the doorstep. "Come to Spring Court alone," Boyd said, "and the water quarter belongs to Meridian." He said it the way another man might mention the weather. Then he tipped his hat and rode back to town, and his horse left neat prints in the mud all the way to the road. Amos stood in his doorway a long time after the prints filled with water. 81 days. He was 32 years old. He had his father's silences and his father's hands, and not much else. He believed, the way a man believes the ground is hard, that he was too grief-worn and too rough to be wanted by anyone. So when he thought about the wife the law required, he did not think about love. He thought about the arrangement of it. A name on a paper. A second body in the house, so the office would call it settled. That was all he had to offer, and he knew it. He had already gone to Lucinda Traub first. Everyone in Cedar Hollow assumed he would. Lucinda was the beauty of the town, gold-haired and quick to laugh, and she had smiled at Amos more than once at the socials. But when he stood in her father's parlor and said the word "soddy," her smile went thin as a knife. She would not live in a dirt house, she said. She was sorry for his trouble. She hoped he found someone suited to it. Someone suited to a burrow. That was what she meant. The second girl said much the same, only kinder about it, which was worse. So on a Tuesday, with 60-some days left, Amos went to the well where Verity Sloane drew water for the wash she took in. He had rehearsed nothing. He said it the only way he knew how, as a fact, a trade, a thing that made sense on paper. My name, your keep. The claim saved. No more than that, and no less. He did not dress it up. He did not have the words to dress it up, and he would not have lied to her even if he did. Verity set her bucket on the stone lip of the well. She looked at him with a steadiness that made him want to look away. She was not pretty in the way Lucinda was pretty. Her face was plain and even, her hair pulled back without any softness to it, her hands red from lye and cold water. But her eyes were clear, and they did not flinch, and Amos found he could not tell what she was thinking. "You're offering me a corner of your life," she said. "Not the whole of it. I'm offering you what I've got," Amos said. "It isn't much. I won't pretend it is." She was quiet a moment, and then she said something that had nothing to do with his proposal and everything to do with her. "I used to have neat hands for the land agent's books," she said, before Boyd let the clerk go. She said it the way people say things they've long stopped hoping anyone will care about. A fact thrown away on the wind. She picked her bucket back up. "I'll think on it," she said, and she carried her water home. Amos did not hear the important part of that sentence. Nobody would have. He heard a laundress mention an old job. He did not hear a woman say she knew where the bodies were buried in Cyrus Boyd's ledgers. She thought on it for one day. Then she came to him with her answer, and with one condition. "I'll marry you," Verity said, "for the claim, and for a roof, since we're both being honest. But I won't be married into a hole in the ground." She looked past him at the soddy, at the square of greased paper where a window should be, letting in a smear of yellow light and nothing else. "A home needs one honest window," she said. "One pane of real glass I can see the weather through. I've lived in borrowed corners my whole life, Amos Reeder. If I'm to build a life here, I'll build it somewhere I can watch the sky. Give me that, and I'll give you the rest." One pane of glass. It seemed a small thing to ask. Amos said yes without understanding that he had just been handed the measure of everything that came after. They married in the church that Sunday. It was a plain wedding and a quick one. Verity wore her one good dress, gray as a dove, and she stood straight through the whole of it. The town came, because in Cedar Hollow everyone came to everything, and the town watched Amos Reeder marry the plainest girl among them. Some of them pitied him. Some of them thought he was clever, a settled household for the cost of a laundress. Cyrus Boyd sat in the back pew with his arms folded and a small smile that never reached his eyes. And Lucinda Traub sat 3 rows up, and when the preacher said the words that made it final, her smile tightened until it was barely a smile at all. That night, Verity moved her trunk into the soddy. It was a dark, low, earthen place, and it smelled of dirt and smoke and the old man who had died in it. But it was dry, and it was warm, and it held. She did not sleep at first. She sat at the rough table by a tallow candle and looked around at her new life. Amos had already lain down on the far side of the curtain he'd hung, giving her what privacy a one-room burrow allowed. She heard him breathing, slow and even, a stranger she had promised her days to. Her eye caught on a shoebox on the shelf. She reached it down. Inside was every scrap of Amos Reeder's paper life, store credit slips in a dozen hands, a tangle of figures scrawled on the backs of seed envelopes, the Meridian note itself folded soft as cloth from being read too many times. And no order to any of it, no sum ever carried out. It was the record of a man who had inherited debt and grief in the same week and had never once had the heart to sit down and add it all up. Verity had neat hands for the land agent's books. She had never lost them. She trimmed the candle, and she began. She sorted the slips by date and by store. She carried the columns down clean and straight the way she'd been taught, the way she'd done 1,000 times at the office desk before Boyd let her go. She found where the storekeeper had double charged for a barrel of flour and never corrected it. She found small errors that a tired man would never catch. And then she came to the Meridian note, and she read the interest terms with the eye of someone who had once copied 100 such notes. And she stopped. The rate written on the note was one figure. The rate Meridian had actually been charging, she could see it in the running total, in the way the debt had grown faster than the plain arithmetic allowed, was another. Higher, Meridian had been overcharging the interest on Amos's father's note since the winter it was signed, not by much in any single month. But month over month, it added up. It added up to real money. It added up to the kind of error that was not an error at all. She sat back, the candle guttered. She did not wake Amos. She only marked it, quiet and sure, in the neat hand nobody in Cedar Hollow remembered she had. In the morning she laid the whole account before him on the table, every column carried out, every debt named, and the Meridian overcharge circled clean. Amos looked at it a long while. He was not a fast reader, and he was slower still with figures, but even he could follow what she had done. She had taken the shoebox that had sat on that shelf like a stone on his chest for 4 months, and she had turned it into something he could hold in his hand and understand. "You did all this," he said. "In one night." "It's only sorting," she said. "It's what I'm good at." But he was not looking at the paper anymore. He was looking at her. For the first time since he'd proposed at the well, Amos Reeder looked at his wife and saw a mind in there, quick and careful and worth more than any pretty face in Cedar Hollow. Something shifted in him a small degree. He did not have a word for it. He folded the paper careful and put it in his coat. "Boyd's been robbing my father since before he died," Amos said. "Yes," said Verity. "He has." Neither of them yet knew how far that thread would run. The clock did not slow for anyone. A week after the wedding, Cyrus Boyd came again, this time to the store where Amos was buying nails, so there would be men to hear it. Boyd leaned on the counter easy as anything and reminded Amos, in a friendly voice, that the $470 came due at Spring Court. He said it like a favor. Then he made his offer. Meridian would buy the relinquishment right now, today, for a small sum, and save Amos the trouble of scraping together money he plainly didn't have. Cash in hand. Walk away from the dirt and the debt both. The men in the store went quiet to listen. "No," said Amos. Boyd smiled his patient smile. 80 some days, he said. "It's a long time to be short $470, Reeder, and a short time to raise it." He tipped his hat and left. But the number was in the air now, spoken out loud in front of witnesses, and everybody in Cedar Hollow knew the size of the hole Amos Reeder had to climb out of before spring. That number followed Verity home. She did not let it into her hands. But she felt it, the way you feel a storm before you see it. The Founding Day gathering came at the end of that month. Cedar Hollow held it every spring to mark the year the first families had come, and it was the biggest day the town had. They cleared the yard behind the church and set up plank tables, and everyone brought what they had. There was fiddle music, and there was a whole hog, and there were more people in one place than the town ever gathered otherwise. Amos did not want to go. Verity made him. "They already think what they think," she said, tying her bonnet. "Staying home won't change it. Going will." So they went, and for a while it was only a crowd and a warm day. But Cyrus Boyd was there in his good coat, and Boyd could not let a gathering pass without making use of it. He stood near the middle of the afternoon and raised his cup and called for a toast. He was smooth about it. He toasted the town, and the year, and the good spring. And then, smiling, he toasted the newest marriage among them, the most practical union Cedar Hollow has seen in years. He let that land. And then he added, to a ripple of uneasy laughter, that he wished the happy couple joy of their home, though I confess I've never known a mouse to be so glad of its burrow. The laughter that followed was small and mean, and it went through the crowd like a draft. Verity stood in the middle of it. She did not flush. She did not drop her eyes. She held her plate level in two steady hands. And then Lucinda Traub came to her. Lucinda was radiant that day, gold-haired in the sun, and she crossed the yard to Verity with a face full of soft, terrible pity. She took Verity's arm, gentle as a friend, and she said, loud enough for those near to hear, how brave Verity was, how good of her to take on such hard circumstances, how she, Lucinda, did so admire a woman who could make the best of a poor bargain. She patted Verity's hand. She meant every word to be a blade, and every word was one. The people nearby watched to see the plain girl break. Verity did not break. She looked at Lucinda with those clear, level eyes, and she said, "It's kind of you to worry over me, Lucinda. But you needn't. I've got dry walls, honest work, and a man who keeps his word. I've had thinner bargains that folks called good ones." She said it quiet. She said it without heat. And somehow that was worse for Lucinda than any shout would have been, because it was plainly true, and everyone standing there knew it. Amos was across the yard when it started. He was not a man who moved fast or spoke in crowds. But he heard the shape of it, Boyd's toast, the mean little laugh, Lucinda drifting toward his wife like a cat toward a bird, and something in him that he did not plan and could not have explained carried him across that yard. He came and stood at Verity's side. He did not make a speech. He just stood there, close, so that the whole town could see that the plainest girl in Cedar Hollow was not standing alone. Boyd's smile flickered, just slightly, before it recovered. Verity felt her husband's shoulder near hers and did not look at him. But something in her chest, some old braced thing, eased by a single degree. They rode home in the dusk without much talk. The prairie was going purple and gold at the edges. Amos held the reins and looked at the road. "You didn't have to say all that," he said at last. "About the bargain." "I meant it," said Verity. "I know," he said. And that was all, but it was more than he usually said, and she heard it. The frost came 10 days later, out of season and out of nowhere. They had just got the first planting in. The corn and the garden truck and the little beans that would feed them come summer. The seed beds were up in tender green rows, the whole year's food not 2 inches tall. And on a night that should have been mild, the wind swung around hard from the north, and the sky went bitter clear. And Amos stepped out at dusk to check the stock and felt the cold laid over the ground like a hand. He knew what a killing frost would do to 2-inch corn. It would do it by morning. He came back in fast. "Frost tonight," he said. "Hard one. It'll take the whole planting." Verity was already reaching for her shawl. She did not ask what they could do. She asked what to do first, and so they worked the whole of that freezing night, the two of them, side by side in the dark. They hauled water from the creek that was worth everything, bucket after bucket, and they carried it to the rows and wet the ground. Because wet ground gave up its warmth slower than dry. They dragged every sack and old quilt and scrap of canvas they owned out to the garden and laid them over the tenderest beds. They built small smudge fires at the field's edge, the way Amos's father had once told him the old country farmers did, and they fed them and watched the smoke lie low over the corn like a gray blanket. Their hands went numb. Their breath hung white. The stars were hard and bright and did not care. They did not speak much. They didn't need to. Verity would go to the creek, and Amos would meet her halfway and take the buckets from her hands without a word, and she would turn back for more. They moved around each other in the dark like two people who had done it 100 times, though they had never done it once. Two pairs of hands doing one work. The frost came. They watched it silver the grass beyond the smudge fires. But inside the smoke, inside the wet rows under their sacks and quilts, the little corn held. When the sky finally grayed toward dawn, and the sun came up thin and cold over the prairie, they stood at the edge of the garden too tired to stand and looked at their rows. The corn was green, bent and beaded with melt, but green, alive. Amos let out a breath he'd been holding all night. And then, from pure exhaustion and pure relief, something happened that had not happened to him since his father died. He laughed. Just a short, rough, cracked sound. And Verity, beside him, filthy and frozen and swaying on her feet, laughed too. A real laugh, surprised out of her. They stood in the smoke and the cold dawn and laughed at their green corn like two fools. It was the first thing they had ever laughed at together. Amos looked over at her chapped face, and her hair come loose, and the mud on her hem, and he thought, with no plan to think it, that she was not plain at all. Not this morning. Not to him. He did not say it. He would not have known how, but after that morning, when the coffee ran low, Amos took to leaving the last cup in the pot for her. He never mentioned it. He'd just pour his own thin and leave the good of it behind. Verity noticed the first time and every time after. She never mentioned it either. But she started mending his one good shirt on Sundays without being asked, patching the collar and the cuffs where they'd gone through, and setting it back on his hook clean. Two people saying a thing neither of them would say out loud. The well accident came in the 6th week. The well rope had been fraying for a while. Amos knew it, and kept meaning to splice it, and kept not having the time. It was an old rope, dry and stiff, and one morning while he was drawing water, it let go all at once. He was leaning his weight into the pull, and when the rope snapped he went down hard and wrong, his head striking the stone lip of the well as he fell. Verity heard him go down from inside the soddy. She came running. He was not dead. But he was gray and cold-sweated, and there was blood in his hair, and when she got him inside and laid out, he was already going hot with fever. She had seen enough sickness in her borrowed years to know it was bad. She had no doctor within a day's ride, and no money to pay one if she'd had the time to fetch him. She had her own 2 hands, and what was in the house. So, she used them. She cleaned the wound and bound his head. She splinted the wrist he'd landed on, wrong-angled and swelling. She got water into him a spoonful at a time through his teeth when the fever took him past knowing her. She sat up with him the whole of the first night, wringing cool cloths and laying them across his brow, and she did not sleep. And when the sun came up, she did the thing that told the town, and told Amos when he could understand it, exactly who Verity Sloane was. She ran the claim. There were stock to water and seedlings to tend, and a whole homestead that would fail in 3 days of neglect just as surely as a frost would kill it. A settled household, the land office called it. Verity made it settled with her own back. She hauled the water, mending the broken well rope first, splicing it herself with a sailor's care she'd learned from her father long ago. She weeded the corn they'd saved. She fed the stock. She cooked and she nursed, and she did not stop. And she did all of it in a dead man's soddy alone, with a sick husband, who might not wake right. And on the 2nd day, Cyrus Boyd's rider came. He came trotting up the track in the late morning, a lean man on a good horse, and he sat looking at the place with a careful eye. "Boyd sent me," he said, "to check on the household, make sure everything's as it should be for the spring filing." He said household like a man counting heads. He was there to see if the settled household had come apart. He was there to find Amos laid up, and the wife overwhelmed, and the claim faltering, evidence for Meridian that the Reeders could not hold what they held. Verity came out to meet him with a hoe still in her hand and dirt to her elbows. She did not invite him down. She stood square in the yard, and she looked up at him with those level eyes. "The household's fine," she said. "My husband's resting. The stock's watered, the corn's tended, and the filing will find us settled and working this ground the same as always. You can tell Mr. Boyd I said so, and you can tell him the well rope's mended too, in case he was wondering." The rider looked past her at the soddy, at the tended rows, at the woman with the hoe who had not blinked. There was nothing to report but a claim in good order. He touched his hat and turned his horse and rode back to town with it. Verity went back inside and sat down by Amos and, only then, let herself shake, just for a minute, in private, where no one could see. Then she stilled her hands and wrung out the cloth again. His fever broke on the third night. He came up out of it slow, in the small hours, with the tallow candle burning low, and his head splitting, and his wrist bound tight to a splint. He did not know at first where he was, or how long. And then he saw her. Verity was in the chair beside the bed, asleep sitting up, her chin dropped to her chest, and her hands folded in her lap even in sleep. There was a basin of water gone cold on the floor, and a cloth over the rim. Her face in the candlelight was hollowed out with 3 days of no rest. She had stayed. She had run the whole place alone and faced down Boyd's man and mended his rope and sat up 3 nights, and she had stayed. Amos lay there and looked at his wife asleep in the chair, and he understood something all the way through for the first time. She would not be scared off. Not by a dirt house, not by a fever, not by Cyrus Boyd, not by a whole town's pity. He had married her thinking he was doing her a favor, a plain girl given a roof. And she had turned out to be the strongest thing on the place, stronger than the corn, stronger than the creek, stronger than him. Something in Amos Reeder that had been shut since January came unlatched in the dark. He must have made some sound, because she woke. Her eyes came open all at once, clear even out of sleep, and found him. "You're back," she said softly. "You stayed," he said. His voice was a rasp. "Of course I stayed." She said it like it was the plainest thing in the world, like there had never been another choice. She reached and laid the back of her hand against his brow to feel the fever gone, and her touch was cool, and Amos closed his eyes under it and did not want her to take it away. He mended slow over the next days, and while he mended he thought about the greased paper hole in the wall where a window should be. He thought about the one condition she'd named the day she agreed to marry him, back when it was only an arrangement, only a name on a paper to save a piece of dirt. A home needs one honest window. One pane of real glass I can see the weather through. He had 81 days once. He had far fewer now. Every dollar he could scrape belonged to the 470 he owed Meridian, and to think of spending any of it on anything else was madness with the clock running down. And yet, when he was strong enough to sit a wagon, Amos did not tell Verity where he was going. He said only that he had hauling work 2 days off toward the rail, wages to be earned, and that she should mind the place. She minded the place. She did not ask. She was not a woman who pried. He was gone 2 days, and he worked those 2 days like a man half again his size, hauling freight for the going wage until his mended wrist ached and his split head throbbed. And when the wages were counted into his palm at the end of it, every cent he'd earned, money the claim badly needed, Amos Reeder did not put it toward the note. He walked into the town's one good store, the one that ordered from the east, and he laid the whole of it on the counter, and he asked the price of 1 pane of window glass. 1 honest window. The first thing he had ever meant to do, not to save the land, but to make her a home. The storekeeper wrapped the pane in straw and old newspaper. Careful, because glass came a long way over rough roads and broke if a man breathed on it wrong. Amos set it in the wagon bed swaddled like an infant and drove the 2 days home with it, going slow over every rut, one eye always on the straw-wrapped bundle behind him. He did not know yet what it would cost him in Boyd's arithmetic to have spent that money on glass instead of debt. He did not know that Lucinda Traub had begun to ask, casual as anything, about the worth of the Reeder Creek quarter, and had not much liked the answer, because the answer was that the plain girl she'd pitied had married the most valuable water for 6 miles. He did not know that a whisper was already moving toward Verity's ear, the exact whisper she had feared her whole life, the one that would tell her she had only ever been a tool after all. Amos only knew he had a pane of glass in the wagon bed, wrapped in straw, and a wife at the end of the road who had stayed. He drove toward the soddy in the falling light with the most fragile thing he had ever carried, and he could not have told you why his heart was going the way it was. He just knew that the arrangement had stopped being only an arrangement somewhere back in that freezing garden, or that fevered dark, and that he was carrying the proof of it home in the back of a wagon, one careful mile at a time. He set the glass in the wall on a still evening, when the wind had gone down and his hands were steady. He worked alone. He had meant to. He cut the greased paper window out of the sod with his knife, and for a moment there was only a raw hole in the wall and the cold coming through it, and he wondered if he had ruined the one thing that kept them warm for the sake of the one thing that would let them see. Then, he set the pane in its frame of green wood and packed the sod tight around it and stepped back. The last light of the day came through it clean. Verity was at the washtub when it happened. She looked up because the room had changed. There was a square of gold on the dirt floor that had never been there before, a true square with sharp edges, the shape of honest light. She stood with her wet hands dripping and did not say anything for a long moment. "You spent the hauling money," she said. "I did. That money was for the note. I know what it was for." She crossed the room and put her hand flat against the cold glass. Outside, the prairie ran away to the dark line of the creek, and she could see all of it now, framed and held, the way a thing is held when somebody has decided it matters. She had asked for one honest window the night she agreed to marry him. She had said it plain, a condition, the way you name a price. She had not truly believed he would remember. "It'll break the first hard winter," she said, because she did not know what else to do with her chest. "Then I'll buy another one." She turned and looked at him. He was standing there, with the knife still in his hand and sod under his nails, 32 years old and worn down to the grain, and he was looking at the window and not at her. The way a shy man looks at everything except the thing he means. She did not say thank you. Thank you was too small and too large both. She went back to the washtub, and after a while she began to hum, low, the hymn she hummed without knowing she did it, and Amos stood a moment longer in the gold light before he went out to the stock. That was the night the arrangement stopped being only an arrangement. Neither of them said so. But a thing had moved in the room, quiet, the way the light had moved across the floor. Lucinda Traub came 3 days later. She came in a hired buggy, in a good dress, with her gloves still on, and she stood in the doorway of the soddy and looked around it the way a woman looks at a thing she has decided is beneath her, slow, so you will be sure to see her decide it. Verity was ironing. She did not stop. "Why, Verity?" Lucinda said. "You've made it almost sweet in here. Sit if you like." Lucinda did not sit. She walked the little room, one glove trailing along the shelf, past the shoebox where all of Amos's papers lived, past the curtain Amos had hung to give Verity her privacy those first weeks, and she came at last to the window and stopped. "He bought you glass," she said. "He did. Do you know what glass costs hauled out here?" Lucinda turned. Her face had arranged itself into pity, and pity was the cruelest thing she owned. "I only ask because I would hate for you to mistake it. A man doesn't spend that on a woman. He spends it on a claim." He needs you settled and sweet in this burrow until the filing goes through, and a woman with a pretty window keeps quiet and keeps still. That's all it is, dear. Everyone in town knows it. He married the deed. You just happened to come with it." Verity set the iron down on its heel. She had feared this exact sentence her whole life. She had heard it in every corner she had ever borrowed, in the auctioneer who forgot to count her, in the boy who left at 19. She had built herself around the certainty that she was only ever chosen for use, and here it was, at last, in a good dress, saying itself out loud. "You've said your piece," Verity said. Her voice did not shake. Her hands did not shake. She had trained them long ago. "The door's where you left it." Lucinda smiled, because a smile is what you wear when you have landed the blow you came to land. She drew her glove tight and went out to her buggy and drove away toward town, satisfied, leaving the seed she'd carried planted deep in the one soil where it would surely grow. Verity picked the iron back up. She finished the shirt. It was Amos's one good shirt, and she had mended the collar that week without being asked, and she pressed it now with a care that had nothing to do with linen. But the seed was in. She could feel it. Everything gentle that had grown between them these weeks, she began, quietly, to wall away, not because she believed Lucinda entirely, but because she could not afford to believe Amos and be wrong. A wrong belief in her own worth had cost her once already. She would not pay it twice. Amos felt the change and did not understand it. The coffee he saved her went cold. The hymn stopped at the washtub. She was courteous and she was distant, and he did not have the words to ask what he had done, because he was certain, in his grief-worn heart, that a man like him always did something, sooner or later, to send the good thing off. And still, in himself, the thing had turned. He knew it one evening by the new window. She was across the room, and the last light was going, and she reached up to pull the curtain, and the gold caught the side of her face, the plain face the whole town had looked past, and Amos felt his chest do the thing it had been doing since the wagon, the thing he had no name for. He opened his mouth. He was going to say it. He did not know the words, but he was going to find them. Because a man cannot carry a thing like that folded up forever. And that was the moment the rider passed. Hoofbeats on the road, unhurried, a shape going by in the dusk toward town. Boyd's man. The clock, riding past his door, the way the clock always rode past. Amos shut his mouth. The moment folded itself back up and went wherever such moments go, and Verity pulled the curtain, and neither of them ever knew how close it had come. Boyd called the note early. He wrote out himself for that, because a man like Cyrus Boyd enjoyed the delivering of it. He sat his horse in the yard and did not get down. He had a paper in his hand, and he had a speculator's patience in his face, and he told Amos the Meridian note of $470 was due now, not at Spring Court, now, and that it hardly mattered, because Meridian had found something better than a debt. "There was a preemption filed on this quarter," Boyd said, "before your father ever set his stake. A prior claim. It's in the record, Reeder. Your father filed on land that was already spoken for. That makes his claim void, and yours with it, and no marriage in the territory can settle a household on ground you never lawfully held." He held the paper out. Amos took it. He could read enough to see the shape of ruin in it, a filing, a date, a name that was not Reeder, stamped and entered and prior. "That's a lie," Amos said. His voice was low. "It's a filing," Boyd said pleasantly. "The court won't know the difference, and neither will you. Come to the Spring Court, and I'll show it to the judge, and you'll walk out with nothing." Or, he let the words sit. "Sign the relinquishment tonight. Take what Meridian offers and go find worse land somewhere the water's bad. Your choice. You've a day or two to make it." He touched his hat to the doorway, where Verity stood, and there was something in the touch that was almost a bow and entirely an insult. Then he turned his horse and rode for town, and the note in the forgery went with him, and the yard was very quiet after. That night Boyd's rider came back, the way Boyd's rider always came, in the dark, with terms. Verity was behind the curtain. She heard the low talk at the door, the rider's voice and then Amos's, and she could not make out all of it, only pieces, only the shape. And then she heard Amos say it, plain, in the tired, flat voice of a man who has been beaten down to the one thing he has left. "I'll do whatever keeps the claim." Whatever keeps the claim. She lay very still, and let the sentence go all the way through her. There it was. The truest thing, said at last, in the dark, when he thought she was asleep. Not you, not stay. The claim. He would do whatever it took to keep the land, and she was part of whatever it took. She was the settled household. She was the thing that made the filing hold. She was, the word came to her clean and cold, a tool. Lucinda had said it in a good dress. Boyd had said it with his hat. And now Amos had said it himself, without knowing she could hear, which was the only way a man ever says the true thing. She did not weep. She had a long habit against weeping. She waited until the rider had gone, and Amos had lain down, and his breathing had gone slow and even, and then she rose in the dark, and she packed her trunk. She did it quietly. She folded the mended shirt and left it on his side because it was his and not hers. She took her own things, which were few. She took the trunk that held all she owned, and at the very bottom of that trunk, under the linens, wrapped and flat and forgotten, lay a thing she did not think of at all in that black hour, the carbon copies she had kept from her clerking days. Her own hand's record of the land office's true register, carried from house to borrowed house for years, because a woman who has been turned out learns to keep her proofs. She meant to free him. That was the shape she gave it, standing in the cold with her breath showing. He wanted the land and the beauty both, and she would not stand in the door of that. She would take herself out of the arrangement and let the arrangement do what it was built to do. She harnessed the horse in the gray before dawn, and she set her trunk in the wagon bed, and she drove away from the soddy with its one honest window, out onto the road that ran the 6 miles to town and past it, going. She told herself, anywhere. The sun came up on her, about 3 miles out. It came up flat and gold across the prairie, and it came in over her shoulder and lit the road ahead, and something in the plain morning light, the honest square of it, turned a key in her that grief had locked. She was thinking, without wanting to, of Boyd's paper. Of the filing. Of the date stamped on it, prior, before her father-in-law's stake. She had read that date in the yard over Amos's shoulder without meaning to, the way a clerk reads dates, the way her eye had been trained for years to catch them, and her trained eye, 3 miles out, in the morning light, finally caught it. She pulled the horse up in the middle of the empty road. That date. She knew that date. She knew that whole week. It was a week from the winter she still remembered, the winter Amos's father died, and it was a week when the Cedar Hollow land office had not filed one single thing, because the creek had come up over its banks in a January thaw and flooded the office floor, and Boyd had shut the doors for 6 days, from the 7th to the 13th, and turned every soul away. She knew because she had been the clerk who copied the closure into the register in her own neat hand. No filing could bear a date from that week. There had been no office open to receive it. Boyd had backdated his forgery into a grave, a week the record itself, in her handwriting, proved was shut. And she still had it. The register. Her carbon copy of it, at the bottom of the trunk behind her, wrapped in linen, carried all these years. She sat in the road, and she understood 2 things at once, and they arrived together, so that she could never afterward hold one without the other. The first was that Boyd could be beaten, plainly and publicly, by a piece of paper in her own trunk. The second, and this one went in deeper, was that Amos had not lied about a prior claim. Because there was no prior claim, because the whole thing was Boyd's manufacture, which meant the trap around Amos was exactly what he'd said, a lie, And the man had been telling the truth in the yard, cornered and truthful, that's a lie, and she had let one overheard sentence in the dark undo all of it. She turned the wagon around. She did not turn it for herself. She was clear on that, hard and clear, the way she was clear on most things she could not have. She turned it because she would not, could not, let Cyrus Boyd win the water quarter by a forgery, not while she had the truth of it flat in her trunk. Whatever she was to Amos, tool or wife or the plainest girl in town, she was also the one person alive who could put the lie on the clerk's table and read the date aloud. That was hers to do. She drove for Cedar Hollow with the sun climbing and the trunk knocking behind her, and she did not go slow. Amos woke to a cold house and a folded shirt. He knew before he was fully awake. The room had that emptiness a room gets. He found the curtain pulled back, and her side of things gone, and the trunk gone from its corner, and he stood in the middle of the little soddy in the light coming through the window he had bought her, and for a moment he could not get his breath. Then he ran for the horse. He understood, saddling in a hurry with his hands not working right, exactly what she must have heard, and exactly how it must have sounded. Whatever keeps the claim. He had said it to a rider in the dark, meaning he would fight, meaning he would go to court, meaning he would not let Boyd take the ground his father died on, and he had left the one word out, the word that had come to matter more than the ground, because he was a coward about that word, and always had been. He rode for town on the same road she had taken, an hour behind her, the horse's breath smoking, and he did not know if he was chasing his wife or his land, and somewhere in the 6 miles he stopped being able to tell the two apart, and knew that was the whole answer, if only he could reach her to say it. The spring court sat in the Cedar Hollow land office, and the town came to watch. The same 40 who had stood in the church and watched Amos Reeder pick the plainest girl in town now filled the benches and the doorway and spilled out onto the step, because word had gone round that Meridian was foreclosing the water quarter, and there would be a show. Lucinda Traub was there in a good dress. Boyd was there with his papers, in a leather folder, patient, sure. The judge was a circuit man with a tired face, and the clerk beside him was a thin fellow who had, years ago, forgotten to count Verity at a church social and never once thought of it since. Boyd went first. He rose, and he spoke well, because he always did, and he laid it out clean for the judge. The Reeder claim was void, filed on ground already taken, and here was the proof. He walked to the clerk's table, and he set his backdated preemption filing down on it with a speculator's smile, the smile of a man laying the last card of a hand he has counted twice. The record shows a prior claim, Boyd said, filed before the elder Reeder ever set his stake. Meridian asks the court to void the Reeder title and grant the relinquishment. That's all it is, Your Honor. A matter of dates. A matter of dates, said a voice from the door. Verity came through the crowd. She had her trunk, and Amos, who had reached the step just behind her just in time, the two of them arriving together the way the whole thing had been built to arrive, carried it in for her and set it on the floor and stepped back, because he had understood in one look at her face that whatever was about to happen was hers to do and not his. Verity opened the trunk in front of the whole room. She lifted out the linen bundle and unwrapped it, and inside were the carbon copies, gone soft at the folds, her own neat clerk's hand filling every line. She carried them to the clerk's table, and she set them down beside Boyd's filing, the two papers side by side, the forgery and the record. I kept the land office books, she said to the judge, plain and level. Before Mr. Boyd let me go. This is my carbon copy of the true register for the winter of 1874. Every entry in my own hand. She put her finger on Boyd's filing. This claim is dated the 11th of January. She moved her finger to her own page. And here is the 11th of January. Read what it says, Your Honor. Read the whole week. The judge leaned. The clerk leaned. The room went quiet enough to hear the stove. Office closed, the judge read aloud. Creek flood. The 7th to the 13th. No filings received. He looked up. 6 days. Shut! Shut! Verity said. By the flood. I copied that closure into the register myself. The January Amos Reeder's father died. There was no office open on the 11th to receive any filing. None. A claim cannot be filed on a day the doors are barred and the floors under water. She turned, for the first time, and looked at Boyd. You backdated it into a week you thought no one remembered. You forgot who kept the book. Boyd's smile was still on his face, but it had stopped meaning anything. He came forward fast. Those copies could be forged themselves. A woman's scribbling, unofficial, worthless. They are the clerk's copies, said a new voice, and I'll swear to the hand. It was the thin clerk at the judge's side. He had risen. He was looking at Verity, and something had come into his face that might have been shame and might have been an old memory correcting itself. I know that hand, Your Honor. I worked beside it 3 years. She kept the neatest register the Cedar Hollow office ever had, and I remember the flood, and I remember the doors shut that week, because I was turned away from them myself with a filing of my own. Her copy is true. I'll swear it on the record. He picked up the true page and held it to the light, and then he did the thing he had failed to do at a church social years before. He looked straight at Verity Sloane, and he counted her, fully, in front of the whole town. The judge sat back. He looked at Boyd's filing, a long moment. Then he took it up in 2 fingers, the way a man takes up a dead thing, and he set it down again. This filing is void, he said. Backdated to a week this office stood closed by flood, against the register's own record, corroborated by the clerk. Mr. Boyd, you've laid a forgery on my table. His tired face had gone hard. I'm ordering every Meridian filing in this district pulled and reviewed. Every one. He turned to the papers of the note next, and Verity was ready for that too. And she showed him the figures she had straightened by candlelight her first married night, the overcharged interest, the $470 swollen from an honest sum by Meridian's crooked arithmetic, and the judge struck the note back down to what the elder Reeder had truly borrowed, and no penny more. The Reeder claim, the judge said, is established. The household is settled, the ground was lawfully held, and the title is granted. He looked at the clerk. Enter it. Amos and Verity Reeder. Both names. The clerk dipped his pen and wrote her name onto the title of the only creek water quarter for 6 miles, and the room let out its breath all at once. Amos did not wait for the crowd. He turned from the bench, in front of all 40 of them, in front of Lucinda and Boyd and the judge and the God of the whole prairie, and he faced his wife. Verity, she looked at him. She had won the thing she came to win, and her face was still guarded, still braced against the sentence she had heard in the dark, because a woman does not unwall her heart just because a judge signs a paper. I heard what you heard, he said. Whatever keeps the claim. I know how it sounded. I left the word off. I always leave the word off. I've been leaving it off my whole life, because a man like me learns to. He took a breath, and the breath shook, and he let it. So here's the word. I put your name on that claim to keep the land. I'd tear the claim up to keep you. The land I can lose and live. You. I can't. His voice was not loud. It went all the way to the back of the room anyway. I count the days for you now. Not for the deed. For you. Stay. The room did not breathe. Verity Sloane, the girl the auctioneer forgot to count, the plainest girl in Cedar Hollow, stood with her carbon copies on the clerk's table and her trunk at her feet, and the whole town watching to see what the mouse would do. She nodded. One nod. It was enough. It had always been going to be enough, and the 40 who had watched him choose her coldly now watched something they had not expected to see in a land office on a court day, watched it land on their own faces. Some of them, the ones who had a wife at home they'd chosen for the right reasons and forgotten to tell. Lucinda Traub stood by the wall with no drink in her hand and nothing to say. She had come to watch a plain woman lose. She had, in fact, planted the very doubt that nearly did it, whispered it in a good dress in that little soddy. Now she stood in her fine things and watched the plain woman's name go on to the most valuable water for 6 miles, watched the man she'd meant to win look at his wife the way no one had ever looked at Lucinda for anything but her face, and she understood, all at once and too late, what she had traded away when she'd laughed at a dirt house. No one was looking at her. That was the whole of her punishment, and it was complete. She gathered her skirts, and she went out, and not one head turned to follow her, and that was the last the town much thought of Lucinda Traub. Boyd they escorted out. He went with his folder under his arm, and his forgery voided on the table behind him, and the judge's order ringing after him, every Meridian filing in the district pulled and reviewed. He had built a career on the certainty that no one who mattered was watching closely enough to catch him. He had let a clerk go once, years back, a plain woman with neat hands, because a plain woman with neat hands was the most forgettable thing in his office. He had never once, in all his counting, counted her. Now she stood at the clerk's table with the register in her own script, and he was walking out a ruined man past the benches of a town that had heard him call her the mouse, and he did not touch his hat to the doorway this time. There was no one in the doorway to insult. She was at the center of the room, where he had never thought to look. They went home in the wagon, the two of them, with the trunk in the bed where it had ridden out and ridden back. Verity drove. Amos let her. The road ran the 6 miles gold in the late afternoon, and neither of them said very much, because the saying had been done in the land office in front of everyone, and there was not a great deal to add to it. Once, about halfway, Amos reached over and put his hand on top of hers on the line, and she let it stay, and that was the whole conversation, and it was plenty. The soddy came up out of the prairie, with its one honest window catching the low sun, throwing back a square of gold, and Verity looked at it for a long time before she clucked the horse the last stretch home. 1 year on, the light came clean through the glass in the morning. The soddy was not only a soddy anymore. Amos had built a frame room onto the front of it over the summer, and fall, real sawn boards hauled the 2 days from town. And the dirt house that had been the whole of their beginning was now the back room of a proper home. The new room had a plank floor and a table Amos had made, and the table was laid for 2 in the mornings, and the single pane of glass he had spent every hauling cent on that first spring was set now into a wall that had grown other windows around it. But that one, the first one, the honest one, they had kept right where it was, and around it the house had come. The morning light came in through it and lay across the table in a square with sharp edges, and it fell, that year, on a cradle in the corner. Verity moved through the light with the ease of a woman who has stopped waiting to be turned out. She had a home that was hers, her name on the title in the clerk's own ink, and she hummed at the window as she worked. The hymn she had always hummed at the washtub, except that now there were other windows to hum at, a whole wall of mourning, and she went from one to the next. Amos came in from the stock and stopped in the doorway the way he still did, a shy man looking at the thing he means, and watched his wife hum in the light he had bought her, and he did not have to find the word anymore. He had said it once, at the front of a crowded room, and it had done its work, and a man only has to say a thing like that out loud the one time if he lives it every day after. The Meridian letter came on a Tuesday. It came in a good envelope, forwarded and official, and it offered, politely, a year too late, to buy the Reeder Creek quarter at a fair price, now that the little matter of the filings had been cleared up. A new agent's name, a new signature. The company went on. It always would. Amos read it once, standing by the stove with the fire going for the morning. He did not answer it. He did not curse it. He folded it back into its good envelope, and he opened the stove door, and he used the letter to catch the kindling, and he shut the door on it, and that was the whole of what Amos Reeder had left to say to Meridian Land and Loan. The stove took the light. The morning came up through the glass. Verity hummed at the row of windows with the cradle in the corner, and the plainest girl in Cedar Hollow, the one the auctioneer forgot to count, the one chosen coldly, on paper, to save a claim, had turned out to be the truest thing on the whole of that land, and the man who chose her had lived long enough and been humbled enough to know it. 2 pairs of hands had built the place. That was the secret of it, if it had one. Not the water quarter, not the note struck honest, not the forgery voided in front of the town. 2 pairs of hands, and 1 honest window, and a man who finally learned to say the word out loud. If somebody ever looked past you, if you were ever the one they forgot to count, tell me the town you're watching from. I'd like to know how far this story travels.